Hey, welcome to the Get Fit with Jodelle podcast. I am Jodelle as usual, and here's my floating melon as usual. And I'm eager to share with you my next guest, whom I have followed for quite some time and just now have the opportunity to finally get to meet and talk with. And I completely recommend, resonate, and practice what he is putting down for you. And he's also got a really rad last name too. So David Zappasodi, founder of the Brain Flip Weight Loss Program, has a degree in exercise physiology from Westchester University of Pennsylvania. And for the past 20 years, his innovative approach to health and fitness has helped many people transform their lives from binge and emotional eating experiences. His philosophy and techniques are about to brain flip your mind like they did mine. And you will definitely want to listen to every word of this podcast. And you might want to take some notes too, because this is pretty heavy stuff. So David, I'd like to welcome you on, and I'm so thrilled to talk with you.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So Did I leave anything out? I mean, I know you're an author of a book as well.
Yeah, I'm an author. My book was published in 2015. And it was an international bestseller. It hit #1 in 5 different countries, which sort of catapulted me into the things that we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, awesome. Well, that's what my first question was can you tell me briefly what got you into becoming a weight loss expert? But more than that, like how you perfected this technique where you help tons of people fight this really debilitating issue of binge eating and emotional eating and being stuck to their trigger foods and stuff like that.
Absolutely. So I've been in the industry for going on about close to 24 years now. I've been a weight loss expert pretty much the whole time because I started my career as a personal trainer. Mm-hmm. And you know as well as I do that probably 9 out of 10 people or more that come to a trainer, they're looking to lose weight, right? So even though I started out like really into athletics and stuff like that, when I got into the industry, the majority of people I was working with were overweight. And it was challenging for me because my mentors at the time, I noticed pretty quickly on that most people that are overweight were not reaching their goals. They were trying all these different things and nothing was working. And so I asked my mentors and my bosses and stuff why do so many people not have success? And they all told me the same thing. Now, keep in mind, this is about 24 years ago. It's a little bit of a different landscape now. But basically, the stigma is still here. And the stigma, what they told me basically is that overweight people are lazy and they're weak and they're not willing to do what it takes to be successful. And while they're telling me this, I'm watching people like I was working at a gym. So I'm watching people on the cross trainers, on the treadmills, in the weight room, and they look like the exact opposite of lazy. Like they're working their butt off.
Absolutely.
And they're completely frustrated and stuck. And I was like, that does not look like a person that's weak or is lazy to me. Mm-mm. That just looks like something like, to me, it was about the approach that we're using. So, and here's the ironic thing about it. The answer that my mentors gave me, that was the only thing that was lazy about it, because it's real easy to just follow calorie counting, restrict your portions, resist your cravings, work yourself to death in the gym. It's easy to just buy into that philosophy and think, well, if I see a few people on a billboard, like 1 out of 200 people that you see on a billboard, most of those people have gained the weight back by the time you even see them, on the billboard. They've already gained the weight back from when they did that. But we believe that that's the right way because we see these before and after pictures, and we don't see the multitudes of people that have tried and failed. And the reason they failed is not because they're a failure. It's because the approach they're using is failing them. So basically 24 years ago, when I joined this industry, I was not looking to follow the common approaches. I was looking to challenge them. Right. That was my mindset coming into it. Now, I couldn't do that in the beginning because I had no experience. So I used all different kinds of diets. I used the Atkins diet, the blood type diet, the Purging diet, the zone diet. The paleo wasn't a thing yet. But I would have tried that back then. And what I had found at that time is that there's no one diet that works well for everyone. Everyone's individualized. So certain things might work with certain people's, but there's no one thing that like you can lump sum everybody into.
Preach it. Preach it.
Yeah. So then I got into individualization. This is answering your question of how I got
Yeah.
into what I'm doing
Yeah.
now. Then I got into individualization. So I was like refining my training protocols with like static posture assessment, dynamic movement pattern assessment, core function assessments. For nutrition, I was testing people's metabolism, giving them foods that were based on their biochemical individuality, their metabolic like individuality. But even with that, even with all of the individualization that I was doing, it was still a pretty similar thing where the majority of people weren't having success and there were a few people that were. So I realized that even though individualization was important, it wasn't the bottom line of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And what I eventually came to realize is that the issue is within us. It's something that's going on in the sensory aspect of the brain, where we get programmed that like unhealthy foods are good for us. I know that sounds a little strange, but like if I have an addiction to ice cream, there's a part of my brain that's saying that ice cream equals connection or equals safety or equals happiness or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as we try to get away from it, with the thinking aspect of the brain, the sensory aspect of the brain has an entirely different program. So basically what I've come to realize is that like do you want me to just get right into like what I do and like describe it in terms of the brain and all that stuff? Is that where you want to go at this point? Or
Well, absolutely. I mean, I love the whole philosophy. I just think it's so cool that there is a brain aspect, because I remember as a personal trainer starting out too, like diet and exercise only got somebody so far, if at all.
yeah.
And so until you tackle that underlying condition of why they're doing the behaviors that they're doing, you're not going to get anywhere. You're just spinning your wheels. So yeah, when I came across your stuff, I was just like, this is what people are missing as far as like, yeah, do a diet that fits your lifestyle. Like you said, bioindividuality, do an exercise program that you're going to do for life, because that's the one you're going to do forever. But then on top of that, you have to tackle those triggers, those underlying conditions and things like that. So yeah, go right into, tell us about the two types of brain and then how the brain flips actually happen.
Okay. There's a lot of studies on the brain right now. The brain is pretty much like the most complex thing that we know of. So I'm not going to sit here and try to use a lot of technical terminology and scientific terms. I want to talk about just in terms of functional everyday use. Okay. So in terms of what we're here to talk about, food struggles and body weight issues, there's two major aspects of the brain that we're looking at in a functional way. The first is the thinking brain. So that's the part of the brain that we're all very aware of. It's the part that creates ideas and perceptions about the life that we're living, about what's going on around us and within us.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And that part of us, let's take an example of chocolate. Okay. So let's say that we have an addiction to chocolate. All right. So the thinking brain, its goal is in some way to help us to like fix whatever problems we have so that life can be more enjoyable or fulfilling or more in alignment in some way. This is why the thinking brain is always trying to fix problems and find solutions, and like it's always going through its own mental gymnastics, trying to find a way to relieve stress so that we can feel happier, right? I know that everyone that's listening to this can relate to this. So the thinking brain's goal is to become free of the cravings for chocolate, right? Because it sees chocolate as a problem. It's something that if we're in a vicious cycle with chocolate, is creating unhappiness, it's creating stress, it makes us feel bad about ourselves, it makes us feel exhausted because we're always trying to get away from it, all those kinds of things. All right. So the thinking brain is like, we need to get away from chocolate, we need to become free of this addiction. So that's the one side. Now the other side of the brain that I talk about is what I call the sensory brain. Some people call this the reptilian brain or the survival brain or the primitive brain or something like that. I call it the sensory brain because that's literally what it is. It's the part of the brain that's aware of the physical sensations of life, our sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing. But it's not aware of our thoughts about those sensations, okay? So Jodelle, I can look at you and I can see the image visually, but as soon as I put the label of Jodelle on you, that's my thinking brain. The image is in my sensory brain. All right. Now, the reason this is important is because the sensory aspect doesn't use thought. It's not capable of thought. It's not aware of the thoughts that our thinking brain has right now. And it doesn't generate any thoughts of any kind whatsoever. All right. It just lives life through the physical sensations that it experiences directly. And so it has a goal also, like in the same way that the thinking brain's goal is to improve our life in some way, the sensory brain's goal is just to keep us safe. That's the only thing it's built to do. But because it can't think, it has no capacity to think, the way it does that is by creating familiar associations. So what I mean by that is, we've all heard of like Pavlov and his experiments with dogs, where he'd ring the bell and he'd give the dogs food at the same time. He did it over and over again. And eventually they became linked together. It's called associative conditioning. We've all experienced this before. We might have, made out with someone in high school and there was some song on at the dance and we were so in love and feeling amazing. And then a few months later, we hear that same song and it makes us feel sad because that person broke up with us or they betrayed us in some way. And so that song became brain flipped in our own brain. We created an association of that song while kissing that person because it was an intense experience. Just like the dogs, it's an intense experience eating food, right? So this is happening all the time. We're always creating these associations. So let me give you an example in my own life. Last year, I brain flipped ice cream for myself. All right. I took myself through the process I bring my clients through. And I wouldn't say it was like a really strong addiction or anything, but I definitely had a sweet tooth and it was something I wanted to be free of. Okay. And so I knew just from my own experience that ice cream equaled connection for me. So when I was a little kid, I didn't like school. I didn't like going to school when I was in elementary school and middle school. I felt lonely. I felt isolated. I didn't really enjoy being there. Okay. So what happened is when we were at home at night with my family and we're eating ice cream, I had the physical taste of the ice cream in my mouth. And then because I felt isolated during the day, being with my family felt even more emotionally connected because my day was hell, right? I didn't like being in school. So that made being with my family even more enjoyable. If I enjoyed school, I might not have needed that connection from them as much, but because I didn't like it, I really wanted that connection. So I got that connection and we ate ice cream enough. It was consistent enough that ice cream equals connection in my sensory aspect of my brain. My thinking brain has no idea that this is going on. It doesn't matter how smart I am, how intelligent I am. This kind of association isn't making a connection in the conscious thinking mind. Okay. So what happens is that as I get older, that if that program doesn't change, I will always link ice cream to connection. So if I feel stress or I feel upset about something and I want connection, bam, my sensory brain is going to trigger a craving for ice cream. I'm going to start thinking about ice cream. I'm going to start desiring ice cream. And then as that desire gets stronger and stronger and stronger, eventually I won't be able to stay away from it and I'll go back to indulging again. All right. So here's where the inner conflict, if I were to wrap up this inner conflict in one sentence, it's this. What the thinking brain knows to be the problem, the sensory brain directly experiences as the solution. All right. So anyone who has an addiction to chocolate or ice cream or fast food or whatever, I want you to think about it this way. There's a lot of pain all around that vicious cycle, right? Before we eat it, there's the pain of having to use discipline and willpower and having to restrict ourselves and resist it and avoid it and escape it. And all that stuff it's freaking exhausting, right? It exhausts our life. It makes us feel like we have no energy and it's just exhausting. It's tiring, right? So that's one type of suffering or pain that we experience. Now, after we indulge, there's a different type of suffering, right? There we're beating ourselves up and feeling ashamed and feeling guilty and regretting it and feeling like we're a failure. All right. So there's all this suffering. But I want you to think about in the point of indulgence, the moment we're going to eat it, right? Don't we just say, screw it, I'm just going to have it. We sit back and we relax and we watch Netflix or we surf the internet. We do something, we stand at the counter and can become completely absorbed with the food. For some period of time, we're completely absorbed in that food. Now, I want you to understand this, okay? The sensory aspect isn't aware of the thinking suffering, like the guilt and the shame and the restriction and the willpower, it's not aware of all those things and linking it to the food, because we're not eating the food when we're experiencing that suffering. The only thing that the sensory aspect of the brain is aware of is what we're doing in the very moment that we're eating. It's just like the dogs in Pavlov's experiments. Anyone that has a dog knows what I'm talking about. If the dog does something, if it pees on the rug and you try to punish it 10 minutes later, it doesn't get the, excuse me, it doesn't get the message because it has to be in the act. That's the sensory brain in action, right? It's the same thing. The sensory brain in us is the same as in a dog. The only difference between us and dogs is we have a much, much more comprehensive thinking aspect to our brain than a dog does. But the sensory aspect is no different. We need to be in the act in order to make a link, all right? So that's what's going on, is that we might be feeling all this suffering and all this pain and all this restriction and exhaustion around the vicious cycle, but in the moment we're eating it, that's where we feel the enjoyment. We enjoy the taste of the ice cream or the chocolate or whatever it is. We sit back and we just like relax and unwind. We have a little bit of a glimpse of time where we're not focused on all these things that are making us stressed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the source of the problem. The source of the problem is when we're watching Netflix, when we're enjoying that taste, when we're doing those things. Because if I were to keep letting ice cream equal connection for me, then anytime I get stressed, it's going to trigger a craving. The only way that I can be free of that for good is to reprogram my sensory brain that ice cream does not equal connection. So that's what I help people to do. That's why I have people eat that junk food right in the beginning, so that we can reprogram it and they can become free of it.
Yeah, and I want to come back to that aspect too, because it sounds like way counterintuitive to everything that people hear when they have like an eating disorder or a binge episode, is like, don't have that food in your house and never go near it and stuff. But food is everywhere. I mean, you have to help yourself get to a stage where you can be around it and you control the food. It doesn't control you. And I think therein lies when you said the word inner conflict. That's what I remember as a high schooler going through an eating disorder, is like there was this inner conflict of I want to, but I can't. And then when I do, I feel bad. And that it was those two brains competing with each other almost, or I guess not competing,
They
but
are.
overriding, being overridden, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we want more of the aspect of the thinking brain. We need the sensory brain more for instinctual things like, fight or flight, running from a tiger, taking care of our family. And we don't want the sensory brain so much for everyday decision making, like what we're going to eat, correct?
Well, the great thing is that we can reprogram the sensory brain to be in alignment with the thinking
Okay,
brain.
great. Okay,
So that
perfect.
way it's like they're working together as opposed to combating or battling each other.
Yeah, and
And
therein
an
lies where the
interesting,
inner conflict goes away then.
right. And an
Yeah.
interesting thing I wanted to mention based on what you just said, with like how people are taught to keep the food out of the house and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What I tell people is that when you actually like remove that food from the house, you are guaranteeing that you will not get to the root of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
We don't get to the root of the problem through restriction. Like willpower doesn't last forever. It's not
Mm-hmm.
sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
We can use, when we're using willpower, basically what we're doing is just like you just said, we're using the thinking brain to override the sensory brain, but it can only do it for a certain period of time. Like when we inhale, we have to exhale. And when
Mm-hmm.
we exhale, we have to inhale. They have to work together, right?
Sure.
Well, I can keep using the thinking brain to try to, keep using that discipline, keep using that willpower to stay away from it. But if I'm not changing the sensory brain program, that's going to come up. Like that doesn't kill the sensory brain. It just makes
Mm-hmm.
it stronger the more we resist it. So then it's like the longer we hold our breath, the more that we forcefully have to inhale. So when people use all this discipline and willpower, that's why the cravings come on really strong afterwards. It's like trying to hold your breath forever and you can't do it. You can't resist. Even if a person is able to like resist, like if they're able to, I've had people join my program and they're like, great, I haven't had ice cream in like 5 months.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, do you think about it? And they're like, yeah, I mean, if it was around, it would be hard.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, great, go get it. We're eating it.
So that pain you were mentioning, because you mentioned there's pain involved, the guilt, and then also the vicious circle of like trying not to get to that food or that binge time or whatever.
Suffering, not suffering's a better word.
Okay.
I don't mean physical pain. I mean like
Right.
emotional pain when I
Yeah,
say that.
sure. That's what I was going to ask, is like the pain, and the you have this aspect of a pain tool. Can you elaborate, when I heard you speak about a pain tool and what a pain tool is when someone's going through this type of program you've developed?
Sure. So what I do is, okay, so let's say a person, let's stick with the example of chocolate, right? So um, what they're going to do, like if they have, let's say they have these food addictions to chocolate and chips, fast food, whatever, okay? And then maybe they have compulsive overeating, and then they have a certain amount of weight to lose, or they're overweight a certain amount. What they're going to do is I have them like sort of project into the future. If they were to never ever solve these issues, how could life keep going downhill? And this sounds really, really unappealing. I know it sounds unappealing, but what it does, it helps them to become completely free in a way that they absolutely could not even imagine beforehand. Right? So they have to really be willing to like get into the spirit of this, of looking at, okay, if they gain more weight, how much weight are they going to gain? How much, like, will they get diabetes? Will they get cancer? Will their kids gain weight through their influence? Will they be like looking out the window at their grandkids playing outside, and they can't play with them because they're in a wheelchair? So they feel disconnected. Like, what are the worst things that they could imagine happening if they were to never ever solve these food struggles and not lose the weight, if they were to maybe even gain more weight? Okay. And what I do, I have a very specific formula for how they're going to like sort of create this nightmare scenario, and I have them record it. Okay. After we've gone through it, I make sure it's good, and I make sure that it's really like it hits all the targets I need it to hit in the formula. And so then they record this audio, and I have them listen to it while they're eating that chocolate or whatever it is. We start with the cravings for unhealthy foods first, because that's a one-part brain flip. Overeating is a little bit of a different brain flip that we can talk about in a little bit. But with like cravings for chocolate, they're going to eat the chocolate while they're listening to this, okay? And it's in their own voice, and it's horrible. It's the most painful things that they can imagine happening, right? And so what happens is that when they do this correctly, so my first job with these people is first to get them to create the pain tool correctly, because most people will not dive as deep into the pain as I like. That's what coaching is for, right? Like I help them to really get in touch with the pain in a way that's more honest and more sincerely real than they've ever gone before. That's a big part of my job, is getting them to do that correctly. Once they've done it correctly, my next job is to get them to use it correctly. So they're going to listen to it while they're eating this food. Now their thinking brain is going to try to distract them in different ways. And as I listen to their experience and I find out what's going on, this is where I become more of like a meditation teacher than a weight loss expert, because what I'm doing is I'm listening for where they dissociate from their own mind. And then I point it out to them, like where they might go third person and see it from a third person perspective. There's different dissociations they might do, but basically the mind tries to dissociate from what they're imagining, because it's painful. It doesn't want to experience that in the first person. It wants to just witness it as opposed to being in it. Right. So once I point it out, they can't be tricked by that anymore, because the mind is very clever, and it finds all these little nuanced, really subtle ways to get them to make it less painful. And so as I help them to become more unified into the practice, the cravings start to decrease. This takes about a week, okay, for the cravings to start to decrease. And the reason why is because, listen, if they get stressed, all right, and they normally trigger a craving for chocolate, all right, well, and then they eat it like watching Netflix and they relax, then that rebalances the stress for a short period of time. It might be just a glimpse, but it does do it. So it serves a purpose. But if they're now eating the chocolate and they're listening in their headphones to this horrible situation that they are themselves talking about, and it's a living hell for them, it's a nightmare, that's not going to relieve their stress, right? So the sensory brain isn't going to keep triggering a craving for chocolate when it gets stressed, if eating chocolate makes them even more stressed, right? So now the cravings start going. It's very simple. It's very simple. It's not easy to do. That's why I have a job. It's a very complex, because we're dealing with a lot of complex and moving toward the simple. This is such a simple practice that it's hard because it's simple. People are used to looking for complex things, complex technologies and scientific understandings. But the truth is actually, the truth of the present moment is so simple that it's not easy to see. So anyway, it takes about a week to help them to decrease the cravings. At that point, once the cravings start going away, I'm no longer guiding them in doing the practice correctly because they're doing it correctly. Now I flip around and I try to find ways to tempt them. I start trying to test their inner fortitude. So I'll tell them, I want you to take if cookies are a problem, take them out of the shelf and put them on the counter where you can see them every day. Your family's eating them, great. Don't go away when they're eating it. The ice cream, go and be there with them. Drive by the Dairy Queen and get something there. Go down that aisle in the supermarket that you're afraid to go down. Go down it and go and buy it. Like, go and buy it. Let's see if you want it. And listen, if they want it, if it triggers a craving, great. Go ahead and eat it. Do it with your pain tool.
Right.
It's going to make it less appealing. It'll make it even harder for me to tempt them again. And eventually, after about another week, it takes about 2 weeks, a week for cravings to start to decrease, and then a week of me trying to tempt them and tempt them and tempt them for it to get stronger and stronger and stronger until eventually they're just like, David, I just don't want it anymore. Like, there's nothing you can do to get me to want it. And then I'm like, okay, we're ready to go into overeating now.
Yeah, I can imagine that eating something and checking out, like most people do, they're just going to grab their favorite foods and check out of society. Like, let me just check out. I don't want to think about anything. And in fact, like crunchy foods actually distract your mind. Like crunchy foods actually distract your thoughts so that thinking brain can't even function because of the sound. So that's why people crave actually certain crunchy foods. And so it's like, yeah, if you're going to check out, that's actually something that people may or may not want to even change. So that's probably step one, is like they have to actually want to make that what's the word I'm looking for? Like the wherewithal that I do have to stop checking out. Like I have to be present. And then I can't imagine that having a recording of my own voice in my ears saying all the things that I know I'll feel after I eat this food and saying all the things that are connected to how I'm feeling when I eat it in a negative way would make me want the food. So that's why I can see that this is such a powerful way of approaching the trigger foods and the food struggles, as you said. I think it's so powerful because nobody likes their own voice, number one. And number two, if all of it is nightmarish things that you have to really check into and hear yourself say, then absolutely. I mean, I think it's a powerful program. Now,
well, here's the interesting thing about that with the pain tool. As the cravings start to go away, the pain tool actually becomes less painful. The pain tool transforms as their cravings transforms, because the pain tool, the reason it's so painful is because it's contingent upon their addiction. But as the addiction starts to go away and they realize, oh, you know what? I'm actually becoming free of this. Listening to the pain tool becomes less painful. Like, Jodelle, let me give you an example, okay? Let's say that you had a major, major addiction to chocolate, all right? And I were to tell you, listen, I'm going to tell you the truth, okay? In 5 years, if you don't become free of that addiction, you're going to want to become a man.
Interesting.
Now that doesn't scare you, right? That just sounds stupid, right? Why?
Because it seems so far-fetched,
Right. Like
so
it's
far out
like,
there. Yeah.
It's not realistic for you. Like you're confident in that area and you know who you are as far as that goes. Not to say that there's anything wrong with having that inner conflict. There's a lot of transgender and stuff going on right now. And
sure.
I'm not saying that there's anything wrong, but if you're not in that place, it doesn't make sense that an addiction to chocolate is in 5 years going to make you come to that place.
Right.
There's no connection there that makes it painful for you. Like when I first said that, you weren't crying, you weren't getting scared. You were just like, what the heck is this guy talking about? Right. Well, that's sort of what happens at the end of the pain tool. When they get to the end, they're like, this stuff isn't going to happen to me. So it was so painful in the beginning, but now it's like, yeah, they don't have the addictions. They don't have the overeating problems. And then when they start losing the weight, it really starts to become less and less painful because there's no connection. There's no addiction there anymore to make it painful. So it becomes, and in terms of the cravings are a great thing. Like it's great for them when they become free of the cravings, but the real benefit of this practice isn't the cravings go away. That's awesome, like that. But that to me is sort of like a secondary thing. The primary thing is how they deal with stress.
Mm-hmm.
And this, I started noticing this soon after I started taking people through these brain flips, because what I'd have people saying is like, before they might say, oh man, I got cut off in traffic today. I was so furious. I was so angry. Oh, like, and they were be so in it, right? And then after they started going through this brain flip and they started becoming free of the cravings, what would happen is they'd be like, oh, something interesting happened. Like, I was driving and I got cut off today, and I started noticing in my mind, like, some anger started coming up. I was like, oh, that's interesting. There's anger toward this person. I mean, I don't know anything about, I don't know why they cut in front of me. Maybe they have an emergency they need to get to. I have no idea. Like, they start to have a broader perspective on things instead of being so like, their mind tells them something and they're so drawn in and like believing what their mind's telling them, that by engaging in the pain tool and becoming really engaged in it and free in the addiction, it dissociates from the mind and sees like, oh, you know what, there's actually different perspectives, and it makes them become more centered and aware. And I take that centeredness and I take that into that's when I go into the overeating brain flip, as they become more centered. It's sort of like the movie Limitless. Have you ever seen the movie Limitless?
No, I haven't.
With Bradley Cooper. He's like, Bradley Cooper's a washed up writer. His girlfriend breaks up with him. He doesn't have a job. He's like got writer's block. He's on the first page and he keeps doing it over. And basically, like, he just feels this like sense of apathetic about his life. He comes upon this drug called NZT that gives him 100% access to his brain. And he takes it, and all of a sudden he's like, bam, he's like cleaning up his apartment. He's like, he writes like a whole book. Like, he does this whole thing, and the book's like amazing, like all this stuff. And it's through getting access to his brain. And what I do, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this will have watched that movie Limitless. And what I do is sort of similar to that in a way, because think of it this way. Like, let's say a person wants to lose 60 pounds, right? If they were to put all of their focus, like all of their mental focus was just on moving in that direction. And if you think about like wanting to lose 60 pounds, if a person wants to lose that, they usually want it because it would make them feel more of a sense of freedom in their body or more fulfillment, right? So the reason they want it is because of feelings they're going to have: freedom, fulfillment, joy. If we could move in that direction 100% with fulfillment and freedom and joy, we would move toward our goal in the same way that a water droplet moves through a river. It would just stream right down. It would be effortless. That's what called being in the zone is, right? Like, we're unified. But that's not why. It's not easy to do that, because we have a huge branch going off this way of water that's branching off into cravings for chocolate, ice cream, fast food, chips, whatever. And then we have another one going in this direction for overeating, where we eat too much at dinner, we have cravings at night, like all that kind of stuff. And then we have our vicious cycles of like feeling like we're a failure and feeling exhausted and feeling like we're not doing enough and feeling all this stress. Like, we have all these branches off of the water, where eventually what's going toward the goal is like a little trickle. It's like a little stream compared to this forceful current. So when we brain flip cravings, that's a whole section of water that's going off. It's not going off anymore. It's now going toward their goal. So they start to become more uplifted. They become more centered and aware, like, oh, I have more strength within me than I realized before. Okay, I'm in a different playing field now. So that's the exciting thing, because now when they get into that place, they're able to be more in the present moment. And when stressful things come up, they can deal with it more directly, as opposed to, like, let's think of it this way. If I typically get stressed and then I escape into ice cream or into chocolate or fast food, if I cut off those escape routes, I am forced to deal with stress in a more functional, effective way, right? Which is going to help me to resolve it like more long-term, because the more I avoid my stress, or the more I try to escape it, I'm pretty much guaranteeing that that's going to keep coming up in my life over and over again in some way.
And I think an important part of your program is that you go to the root of the problem and you explain to the individual why it even happened, or at least you offer suggestions of why it happened in the first place. Because I love your philosophy behind overeating and where that develops from. And so I want you to take my listeners through that, because I really resonated with that one. I was always a clean your plate club kid. And I think you can explain why that transfers into adulthood, having some eating issues.
Absolutely. So if you guys remember when we talked about like my challenges with like having a sweet tooth with ice cream, I linked ice cream to connection when I was with my family and I was
Mm-hmm.
eating ice cream at the same time, like Pavlov's dogs ringing the bell, giving them food. I
Mm-hmm.
was eating ice cream, hanging out with my family, connection. So those two get connected, right? So overeating would be like if I was younger and I'm sitting at the table and I want to get down, I've had enough to eat. And then my dad says, no, you got to finish your plate or else you're not going to be able, like, I'm going to be punished or something like that. Right. So what happens is that I have to sit there and force myself to eat to fullness with this food that I really don't want to eat
Mm-hmm.
so that I'll be safe from punishment. So what that means is if that happens consistently enough, then overeating equals safe from punishment. They get linked together. All right.
Game changer.
So then when a person gets older and they're like, now in their thinking brain, they're like, I don't want to overeat. Like I want to lose weight. I want to feel good. I don't want to feel gross after I eat. Right. So in their thinking brain, overeating is suffering.
Mm-hmm.
But in their sensory aspect of their brain, overeating equals safe from punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And anyone who has compulsive overeating, if you really think about this, and I know this because I've worked with more people than I can count, in the very act of overeating, usually checking out, right? Like
Right.
completely just blanking out on what's
Mm-hmm.
going on, right? Or watching TV or something like that as well,
Yeah.
right? But oftentimes it's just like checking out. It's like you're eating so fast, you're shoveling in, you're like not even thinking about anything.
Mm-hmm.
That's a moment of relaxation from your stress. That's the root of the problem. So we have to do the same thing with overeating that we did with cravings. But here's where it's challenging with overeating. With overeating, overeating is a fundamentally different type of challenge from cravings for unhealthy foods,
Mm-hmm.
because whereas with unhealthy foods it's more about like the taste of the food, that ice cream, that chocolate, that like hamburger, the fries, chips, whatever it is, like the taste of the food in the mouth and the enjoyment of it. With overeating, a lot of people overeat. They're like, I don't even want to eat this food, but they can't stop
Mm-hmm.
overeating, right? So it's not about the taste of the food as in the mouth as much with overeating. It's more about the fullness of the food in the belly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because when they were eating, when they were younger, it's like they felt gross, but they were safe, you
Right.
know? And maybe the safe thing was like, if you don't eat all that, you're not going to get ice cream. That might have been the punishment, is like
Mm-hmm.
not getting something like that. Right. So then they eat, they become bloated, they feel gross, but then they're going to get a reward because of it.
Mm-hmm.
So then that gross feeling equals a reward.
Mm-hmm.
And in our sensory brain, that's what becomes programmed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what we need to do is, now we're not trying to brain flip specific foods like chocolate or whatever. Now we're brain flipping the quantity of food. So the way
Mm-hmm.
that so overeating is a 2-part brain flip, whereas cravings is a 1-part. With cravings, it's like I just get the chocolate, I eat it with my pain tool, right? With overeating, what I have to have them do is I have them prepare the same amount that they would normally overeat. They have to purposely overeat in order to become free of overeating. All right. But what we'll do is we're going to split it onto 2 portions, 2 different plates. And here's the key. It has to have the exact same foods on both plates.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So if there's potatoes on one, there's got to be potatoes on the other. If there's carrots on one, there's got to be carrots on the other. You can't have any food on one plate without having it on the other plate, because we're not trying to brain flip foods. We need to balance out the equation so that it's just about the quantity of the food we're eating, not about the specific foods. And so with the first portion, now after they become free of the cravings, they're a lot more centered and they're a lot more aware, consciously aware of just everything in life in general, but especially with food. What I have them do is I have them do a centering practice where they really start to become aware of when they're satisfied with that first portion, that the food tastes good, that it makes their body feel good, their body feels light and feels, good while they're eating it. And when they gauge that it would be the right amount that it would sustain them until the next meal.
Mm-hmm.
So they're becoming aware of those things in the first portion with this centering practice that I give them. Once they're done with that, all right, and they feel, when they've eaten enough that they feel like it would sustain them, they go to the next portion and they use their pain tool with the second portion. So
Mm-hmm.
now they're eating the same food that they just ate in the first portion, but now they're doing a centering practice in the first and a pain practice, a painful practice, a pain tool practice in the second, so that it starts to rebalance the way that the portions that they're eating.
Yeah, so they're actually like feeling that satisfaction with the first portion, but then when they're using the pain tool with the second portion, they realize this isn't fun anymore. I'm not feeling satisfied. I'm not feeling good.
Well,
And so
they're feeling full, but
okay.
they're feeling full, right? But now instead of full being a reward, now it's a punishment. So we're
Mm-hmm.
reprogramming it in the opposite direction,
Ah, I
right?
like
The
that.
first portion was satisfying.
Yeah.
It was enjoyable. And as they keep going through this practice, the first portion gets even more satisfying. They
Mm-hmm.
become more aware. Like they start to really get a good gauge as they keep doing the practice. It usually takes about 4 or 5 days to really get into the swing of this practice where they're like, okay, I really have a good gauge of how much food it is that satisfies me. And then when they get to that second portion, it gets worse and worse as they keep going. Um, I have them eventually, like basically what happens is in the beginning, as they're brain flipping it, they're not as aware of how much will satisfy them. So they have challenges with the first portion, but they're centered and they're more aware. So it makes it easier. And
Mm-hmm.
then with the second portion, it's painful and it's shocking. Okay. As they keep going, they're like, all right, I'm starting to get a hang of like knowing how much is satisfying me.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second portion is like, I really don't want to eat that. Like, they're like, can I please stop? I'm like, no, you can't stop. Right. So they
Well,
keep going. And eventually they're like, I'm crystal clear. I wait until they're crystal clear on like, I know exactly how much is
mm,
the right portion. Like I can feel it. And here's a big myth. You don't have to be like skinny to know how much to be in tune with your body. You
mm-mm,
can be 300 pounds, you could be 150 pounds.
mm-hmm.
You can be in tune with your body just as easily in either direction. I know that that's not something we're used to hearing, but all the people that I take through this brain flip, they're overweight. People don't lose weight by this point. They don't. When I do the first cravings and they're overeating, they haven't usually lost weight yet.
Mm-hmm.
They might lose a little bit, but usually not. I'm not focused on weight loss at all in the
Sure.
beginning. Like I
Sure.
don't want them to try to lose weight while they're battling with inner conflicts. I just want to get
Mm-hmm.
the inner conflicts out of the way, and then all that water in their river is going in that direction. They feel excited, they feel inspired, they feel encouraged, uplifted. Then we're working on weight loss because now it's like they become unified, they become aligned, they become more in harmony with life. They're more empowered,
Yeah.
basically. Now they're like, I need to get the weight off because I want this new life, as
Right.
opposed to, oh, I need to lose the weight so I don't have a heart attack. It's a different
Right.
energy, completely different energy, right?
Yeah,
So
that I don't know about other people listening to this, but when I first like heard you talking and I learned the reason why behind why I overate, I never could understand why I could get to a meal and not like do the push away that so many people did. Like, oh, I'm so full, I'm just gonna push away. I'm like,
yeah,
how come I can't do that? Like, and even it wasn't even like binging. It was just like I'd make a plate and maybe it was like I was looking at it going, oh, this is probably more than I need, but I'd eat it, you know,
right.
or if I went to a buffet, it was like you just keep eating until you're like miserable. And I'm like, other people can just like get 2 plates and then half of their last plate they don't even eat. Why can't I do that? So when I heard you say the reason behind it, that was a game changer for me because I was like, just to know that I was eating to feel safe and secure, because exactly the situation that you said was what I grew up with. I grew up with parents that said you will not leave the table until you clean your plate, and they didn't know any better. They thought they were just nourishing me, trying to get me to eat all my food. But kids inherently know when they need to stop eating. They listen to that inner knowing, and we
Yeah,
lose that through issues like this and just getting out of our own body as we get older. And so when I learned that, okay, fullness does not equal safety and security, I can actually push away when I feel satisfaction and I'm good. And when I learned that, that was huge. I was like, okay, now at least I have the reason behind why I did that for so many years.
yeah, and there's other reasons there's other ways that overeating can get programmed. I have a lot of people that come to me and they're part of a large family. Like there's a
Hmm.
lot of family members. So if they don't eat really fast and eat as much as they possibly can, there's not going to be enough food at the end, and so they're going to be hungry.
Okay, and I
That's
have
another.
another instance that was told to me by a friend, client kind of thing. He was imprisoned for a while, and this individual didn't know how much he would get when he would get like maybe his family would bring food in for like a free food day, or there'd be food that was offered to the prisoners for whatever reason. And he learned to gorge himself in prison. He maybe didn't grow up with a parent like I did, and he learned that I have to eat all this now because otherwise I'm just succumb to the 3 meals a day that I get in the food hall, which isn't that great. So when fast forward to when he got out of prison, he had developed this, like, I have to get full, I have to eat it all, and I might not get this again. Every time he goes to a gathering of friends or family, he might have to feel like he has to eat it all because he doesn't know when he's going to get it, even though he has to tell himself, I can have this anytime I want. I'm not imprisoned anymore.
Right.
So I liked when he shared that with me, because I was like, some people are kind of prisoners to those feelings that they grew up with.
Well, a lot of times, I mean, if a person develops in adulthood, I mean, we've been talking about kids developing it in childhood, which is common. There's adults that develop it through like starvation diets. They go on starvation. That's sort of like being in prison in a way.
Yes.
Your own self-imposed prison. I helped a woman to brain flip bulimia probably about a half a year ago, and she was binging and purging and all that kind of stuff, and we got that all completely taken care of. But she developed it through doing fitness competitions. Like there's all different ways that people can develop these kinds of things. And the weight loss is real. When people gain weight, that's another one that's really interesting, how the body can get programmed to be heavy.
Yeah. And what about, I've heard you use the word addiction a lot. What about people with addictions, like to drugs and alcohol? Like, is this something that the brain flip technique can help with as well?
All right. So I'll put it this way. So I only work right now with people that are, my specialty, my expertise is weight loss, right? So everyone that comes to me has major food struggles and has major weight to lose. And so I help them with that. That being said, when a person joins my program, whatever addictions they're working with, I'm going to look at if we can brain flip it. So I've brain flipped cigarettes. I've brain flipped alcohol. I've brain flipped porn addiction, which is actually the most challenging of them. A porn addiction is more like an overeating brain flip than a cravings brain flip.
Okay.
The first time I brain flipped cigarettes was an accident. And I didn't mean to do it. Yeah, I was working with this woman. Her name is Sharon, about a year ago. And she had a lifelong addiction to sweets. So she'd have usually donuts in the morning and she'd have ice cream at night. So we were brain flipping these. And then a few months later, she was like on the coaching, she's like, David, you know what? I was like, what's that? And she said, I just realized that I haven't smoked cigarettes in a few months. And I was like, really? That's interesting. Well, what was your pattern? Like, how would you normally eat, or how would you normally smoke cigarettes? And she's like, well, I'd have cigarettes with my donuts in the morning. So when we brain flip, it's that association, right? So when she did that consistently, the cigarettes got linked with the donuts. So when we brain flip the donuts, the cigarettes just went along with it. When I first talk with people to see if they're a good fit for my program, I list out all of the things that they have addictions to, like everything, whether it's food, whether it's sex, whether it's cigarettes, coffee, alcohol, like I just list them all out. I very, very rarely have to do all of those things. They usually all get lumped something together into one great big brain flip, where some of them we don't even ever have to address, and they just automatically get linked because they were already linked with something else.
Because I'm thinking of individuals, like I know quite a few clients that struggle with when I get off work, I just want my glass of wine. I don't want to make the world go away with my glass of wine. But again, they're checking out. Like this might be something they want to brain flip, because you don't want to rely on a substance to help you relax. You should be able to just relax naturally, and you can get your body to do that. That way you're not having the extra weight that the wine every night is contributing to. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so take me through, like you mentioned that people can set up when you first talk to see if the program is a right fit for individuals. Take me through that. Like what can they expect just to set up like a call with you? How's that look?
Yeah. So if anyone's listening to this and you're really, really struggling with these issues, right? If you have major food struggles, if you have body weight issues, if you can see there being real consequences to not solving this, that life could get worse in some way. Your kids could gain weight. You could get diabetes. You could have huge medical expenses. You could end up in an elderly care facility. Like whatever you're afraid of, if you have major consequences, then what I invite you to do as a gift for being here and listening with us today to your audience is to schedule a call with me. You can schedule a call with me. It'll be with me directly, and I will guide you through looking at what's really going on in your life and seeing how these brain flips can apply to what you're going through specifically. And you can schedule a call with me at brainflipweightloss.com/talk.
Okay,
Okay.
and I'll
So
have all that in the notes as well, and I'll have it on the screen as well too.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
And
that's such a neat. I mean, coming from someone who consults with people and is all about like chatting with people, it's a lot of time, and so that's a really neat gift to give people, of just the gift of your time to listen to their story and feel them out.
yeah, well, I mean, I am able to do what I'm doing now because my goals in the industry were never to just like I was talking about in the very beginning, it was never to just follow the easy path of getting people to count calories and restrict and work, focus on calories in, calories out, and getting a lot of workouts in. Like I was not looking to do the conventional things because I care. Like I care about people and I don't want to see them in pain. I know that overweight, one thing I know for sure, and I knew in the very beginning, even though I didn't have experience yet, overweight people are not weak, and they're not a failure, and they're not incapable. It's just that you feel incapable if you're using an approach that's incapable of helping you. You feel like a failure when you're using an approach that's failing you. It's normal for us to take it on ourselves, but it's not about you. You have no less strength than your fellow neighbor who you see as living a model life. The only difference is that you just need an approach that can actually get to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem has nothing to do with you. It just has to do with the way that a certain aspect of your brain is programmed that keeps you stuck. That's it.
Yeah, and a
Especially with
lot of
weight.
people just don't have the answers. They're going through this vicious cycle day in, day out because they haven't heard what you're saying. They haven't heard that there's answers out there, and that there's answers for why they are the way they are, that doesn't involve being lazy or a failure, like you said. So I appreciate that so much, about like your passion for helping individuals. I think that's really cool. As far as, like, I just had a couple more questions. I know you're an exercise physiologist. Do you coach people when they're in your program too about exercising when they get to that point?
Yeah, but it's also completely radical. Most people, when I reintroduce exercise, it's only for about 5 minutes at a time.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and the reason why is because I'm not concerned. Like the reason I have people stop exercising in the very beginning is because when they're really frustrated and they're really stuck and they've been there for years and they've tried every program and nothing's worked, they usually don't like exercise. They're doing it more out of a sense of obligation than from a true sense of inspiration. And if that's the case, I'm like, stop. I don't want you doing exercise. I want you to be sedentary so that we can let's just get free of these food addictions first. Then we can reset that relationship. So then once they're free of the cravings and they become more centered, and then they become free of the overeating, they're eating the perfect portions and they feel lighter and more encouraged and more uplifted. Then I do how I have them create the pain tool. After they have gotten free of all those food struggles, then I have them do another one in the exact opposite direction, what I call a vision tool, where their life's getting better and better, where like they're losing weight and they're feeling amazing and they're becoming an inspiration to their family, and their family's like losing weight through their influence. This happens all the time, by the way.
Cool.
When a person becomes really free, like on a root level, you can't help but to inspire other people in some way. It affects them in some way or another. So, and by the time they get to this point, it's easier for them to do it because they've just become free of all these food struggles, right? So I have them create this vision tool, and I have them for about a week, I have them listen to it in a stationary position to really get into the spirit of it and to feel themselves in that place, so that they're not dissociating, that they're really engaged in it. Once they've done it, and it's about 5, 6, 7 minutes long, most people's vision tools. Once they've done that, I then have them listen to it while they're exercising. Now, in the beginning with exercise, it's usually something like a stationary bike or a treadmill that they can hold on to, because I need them to do it with their eyes closed so that they can imagine these things that are going on in the vision practice. And what that's going to do is it's going to reprogram the body now that it's safe to lose weight. The reason that they're overweight is because the sensory brain is programmed that it's safe to be heavy. And there's a few, if you want to hear a few different examples of why that can happen, because it sounds strange that the body would be register being heavy as being safe. One of them, unfortunately, is rape. There's a lot more women than people realize that gain weight after they've been raped. Now, if you think about that in terms of Pavlov's dogs would ring in the bell, give them the food, associations can be formed through repetition, but they can also be formed through a really, really intense experience, unfortunately, like rape. So if a woman's being raped, there's the terror of feeling they're going to die, that they're being violated, and they're terrified, right? And they're also in this slender body that's being taken advantage of. Like, the reason that they're in this situation is because their body was attractive to someone. That's what's going on in the sensory aspect of the brain. It doesn't mean that it's really, the person might just be twisted and just going for whoever they could. But in the sensory aspect of the person's brain that's being raped, that's what's going on. And so gaining weight is a coping mechanism. It makes them safe so that they're less attractive and that others won't be like drawn to them, and that they won't be in a terrifying situation.
Yeah.
All right.
I had that
Sometimes it's something
with a client. I remember hearing you on a podcast say you had a client that you kind of learned about that through a client that you had that was like, well, when I get down to 120 pounds, that's when I was raped. I was that size. And I had a client just like that as well, that she would only get to a certain size because she was afraid of the cat calls, or she was afraid of drawing attention. And so the weight was a protection to her.
Right. So in that kind of situation, when I help them to create a vision tool, I'm helping them to create one where they feel more empowered, stronger, more in control of their life in some way. And they're much more aware. So they're more like conscious of what's going on in their life in general. And so then as they create a new association to what's being slender and fit means in the sensory aspect of the brain, then it becomes safe for them to lose the weight again. Other people, it's not through a traumatic incident. Some people, like, they're born into a family where there's a lot of overweight people. And so on a sensory level, it's important for them to gain weight too, so that they're part of the group, so that there'll be on a survival instinctual level, they're accepted by the group. Because if they're single, they'll be singled out and they could be isolated and expelled from the group, which is unsafe, right? So once again, it's not a conscious thing. Like, no one is consciously thinking, oh, my family's heavy, I need to be heavy like them. No one thinks that. But in the sensory aspect, that's what is going on. That's why people are scared to death of speaking on stage. Even if they have great value to share and they know that they know their stuff and they know that no one out there is going to attack them, they could still be scared to death because it's an instinctual thing to, like, when you're isolated, when the whole group is out there and then I'm up here alone, I'm more vulnerable to attack.
Right. So fascinating.
I'm part of the crowd. I'm safe.
Yeah. I love this stuff. It's so fascinating.
There's a lot of like instinctual primitive. Yeah. There's a lot of instinctual, like, primitive drivers like that are going on that we can brain flip to work for us. But in a survival instinct, they've been programmed in some way to hold us back from, basically to try to keep us surviving but not thriving.
Right. Okay,
we can program it to thrive, though. That's the exciting thing.
Yeah, I love that. So tell us again one more time how they can get a hold of you.
Okay, so if you want to schedule a call with me, I'll go through all this stuff. We'll map it out. We'll map out, like, looking at your life and map out how these brain flips can apply to your life. And you can schedule that at brainflipweightloss.com/talk.
Okay.
All right. brainflipweightloss.com/talk.
Awesome.
That'll take you right to my scheduling page. You can schedule a call with me there. Pick a time that works well for you and just schedule it in your own calendars to make sure you're available. I will call you at that time. Just make sure that after you schedule, there'll be a quick form that'll come up afterwards. Just fill out that form for me. It'll only take you about a minute or so, but it'll greatly give me an idea of, like, what you're dealing with, so that I'll be prepared going into the call to know how to best serve you. Excuse me, how to best serve you in the most effective way.
So cool. So cool. I love it. Well, thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time and your knowledge, because this is something you don't hear anybody else talking about. So I love what you're putting out there. And I hope everybody will give it a chance, because it really is powerful. So thank you so much, David. I appreciate you.
Oh, absolutely.
Hey out there, I'm about to drop one more bit of knowledge about why you should drop an F-bomb. So I have ripped open a packet of coconut oil here, but I'm not going to eat it. I am going to use it as a little natural moisturizer. So you know how when you travel you don't want to take a whole lot, so you pack one of these little bad boys with you, and not only can you eat it, but you can put it on your skin, and it's nature's best sunscreen because it's a natural way to protect from the sun in a low-grade way, so you can stay out all day, get a little color, but not get burnt. Also, maybe after the gym you want to moisturize and then head to work, you can use that. There are so many great reasons to have a packet of coconut oil with you, not just for eating, but also for body and skincare purposes. Works great as a face oil and a body oil. So check out dropandfbomb.com and get some of these handy dandy little packets to keep with you. Even if you're not into eating it, you're going to find it really beneficial to just take on the go with you.